What would you do with a rusty train car sitting on a forgotten rail line? Most people would walk away. But not this female mechanic. With just $500, no blueprint, and a past full of pain. Ava Morgan bought a decaying Pullman car, and what she built inside didn't just change her life. It brought an entire town to tears. This is the emotional story of how a broken, rusted train car became a sanctuary of hope, and how one woman's quiet determination sparked an inspiring transformation no one saw coming. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you just might believe that broken things can be beautiful again. Let's get started. The sun barely filtered through the slats of the weathered barn roof, casting thin shafts of light across dust-covered toolboxes and broken engine parts. Ava Morgan, 34, sat quietly on a milk crate, her grease-streaked hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug filled with cold coffee. She'd lived in that barn for nearly a year now, ever since the last shop she worked at shut down in rural Wyoming. Her father's old property, once filled with the rumble of tractors and the smell of hay, was now a graveyard of rust and silence. The only signs of life were Ava's projects: a half-restored pickup truck, a dismantled generator, and a rusted-out motorcycle she hadn't touched in months. Ava had been a mechanic since she was 19, taught by her father before illness took him too early. Since then, she'd worked odd jobs, fixed farm equipment, and kept to herself. She didn't talk much, not anymore. Not since her mother passed the winter before last. The world felt heavier with each season. That morning, Ava opened her laptop on a stack of tires and scrolled absent-mindedly through auction listings until something caught her breath mid-sip. It was just a blurry photo, a grainy image buried halfway down an online estate sale listing. Vintage 1930s Pullman sleeper car needs full restoration. $500 OBO. Buyer must tow. Ava blinked. At first, she scrolled past it like any other junk, but something about that picture made her stop. The train car sat crookedly on a forgotten track, overgrown with weeds, flanked by bare trees. Its paint had long since peeled away, windows shattered, metal edges curled from decades of wind and snow. But Ava didn't see wreckage. She saw potential. Ava had always been drawn to machines others gave up on. Engines rusted solid, frames warped by weather. She had a knack for seeing through the decay. Her dad used to call it her second sight. Said she could spot the soul of a machine better than most people saw the soul of a person. That night, she didn't sleep. She paced the barn in circles, boots echoing on the concrete, muttering to herself, "Where would I even put it? I don't have the tools." Not for something like that. What the hell am I thinking? But that voice, that small, dangerous one she hadn't heard in a long time, whispered, "And what if it works?" By dawn, Ava had already emailed the seller. A man named Tom, somewhere in southern Montana, replied within the hour. "Still available, but you gotta haul it yourself." She borrowed a flatbed from a farmer friend and scraped together what little she had left in her savings, sold her dad's antique rifle, the last thing she swore she'd never part with. Gutted. But the moment she signed the paperwork and the seller handed over a rusted key with a smile that said, "You sure about this?" Something in her chest shifted. A weight she'd been carrying since her mother's funeral loosened. The train car was far worse up close. It looked more like a sinking ship than anything meant to move on rails. The roof sagged in the middle. One of the wheels had locked in place. The smell inside was a cocktail of mold, soot, and ancient decay. Vandals had left their marks: spray paint, empty bottles, the remnants of bonfires. Someone had even broken apart an old seat to use for kindling. But Ava didn't flinch. She ran her hand along the walls, feeling the thick steel beneath the grime. "Still solid," she whispered, like a mechanic blessing an old engine. She closed her eyes and imagined it not as it was, but as it could be. A warm space, a shelter, maybe even a home. Back in Wyoming, she cleared a flat stretch of land behind the barn and laid down salvaged railroad ties as a makeshift foundation. It took 4 days to haul the train car up the ridge road to her land, one nerve-wracking turn at a time. The trailer groaned, her truck wheezed, and the tow chain snapped twice. On the final stretch, she had to ask a neighbor with a tractor to help nudge it into place. When it finally settled with a heavy, metallic groan and the wheels kissed the makeshift track, Ava stood back, hands on her hips, covered in grease, dirt, and triumph. The wind blew through the open windows. A crow cawed overhead. The land was silent otherwise. And for the first time in years, Ava felt something that wasn't grief. It wasn't quite joy, but it was close. A flicker of purpose. That night, she slept inside the Pullman car for the first time. The cold bit through her jacket. The floor creaked with every breath. Something skittered in the dark. But she laid out a blanket, lit a small oil lamp, and sat beside it, knees pulled to her chest. In her lap, she held a photo of her parents, her mom in a flannel shirt, laughing mid-blink, her dad with a wrench in hand. Ava whispered to them, "I think I found it. The thing that's gonna save me. And maybe, just maybe, save a little piece of the world, too." The second morning inside the Pullman car was colder than the first. Ava woke to frost on the windows and her breath hanging in the air like a ghost. She groaned, stretched her aching limbs, and rolled off the thin camping mat she'd laid out the night before. Her body felt bruised from the hard metal floor, and her knuckles were raw from tearing out old nails. Still, she smiled. The train car smelled less like mildew now, and more like dust and cold steel. She had scrubbed the walls with vinegar and baking soda until her arms went numb. The rust stains remained, but the worst of the mold had been banished. Little victories. That afternoon, while rummaging through a storage cabinet near the back, she discovered something strange. Behind a warped wooden panel, there was a hollow space. She pulled out a crowbar and pried it open, dust and cobwebs spilling into her lap. Inside was a small, wooden crate, weathered, but intact. Ava dragged it into the center of the car, wiped her hands on her jeans, and opened it carefully. What lay inside stopped her breath. Tools! Old, heavy, handcrafted tools wrenches, chisels, a folding ruler, a socket set worn smooth with time. They weren't modern. No plastic handles, no branding, just honest steel and wood, aged and real. Nestled at the bottom was a thick, leather-bound notebook, its corners frayed. She opened it. Page after page of careful handwriting, diagrams, sketches, notes about restoring wood, welding thin steel, building stoves out of barrels, patching roofs, and scattered between all the technical drawings were journal entries, reflections. This car was my second life. A place to begin again when the world moved on without me. Fixing something broken makes you believe you're not beyond repair yourself. The notebook was signed. Elijah M. Ava sat still for a long time, notebook in hand, the weight of the discovery sinking in. Someone else had once lived in this car. Not just lived rebuilt, loved it, left pieces of themselves inside it. She flipped further through the pages. Taped to one was an old photograph, faded. The edges curled. A man with soot on his face, sleeves rolled up, smiling beside the same train car, though cleaner. Proud. Next to him, a woman sat on the edge of the platform, guitar in her lap, laughing. Ava's throat tightened. There had been history here. Life. This wasn't just a junked relic, it had once been someone's redemption. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the wind whisper through the holes in the roof. The idea of someone like Elijah, quietly building a world inside this car, stirred something deep inside her. She imagined his hands guiding the same tools now resting beside her bedroll. She imagined the warmth of his small stove, the light of his lamp flickering on the same walls. She wasn't alone in this story, not really. The next morning, Ava walked down to the creek at the edge of her land. The sun had just risen, casting gold across the icy water. She dipped her hands in and splashed her face, letting the cold shock her awake. When she returned, she took out the notebook again, turned to a blank page in the back, and began to write. Day 1, the Pullman lives again. She scribbled down her goals: fix the roof, patch the floor, salvage the benches. She listed the tools Elijah had left. She circled the line from his journal that hit her hardest. A place to begin again when the world moved on without me. And then, just below it, she wrote her own. Let it begin with me. That afternoon, Ava climbed onto the roof with a roll of tarp and a staple gun. The metal creaked beneath her boots, the wind biting at her coat. She patched the worst holes with shaking fingers and cursed the cold. But by sundown, the interior was drier than it had been in decades. She lit a small fire in a makeshift barrel stove she'd welded herself. The warmth was thin, but it reached her fingers. She sat beside it, notebook in her lap, Elijah's tools in a neat row nearby. The Pullman car groaned in the wind, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. A week had passed since Ava found the crate of tools and Elijah's notebook. The Pullman car was still a mess, but it was starting to breathe again. She'd patched the worst leaks, swept out most of the glass, and sanded one of the wooden benches until the grain gleamed in the sunlight. She even managed to wire in a small solar battery to power a lamp at night. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. For the first time in a long time, Ava wasn't just surviving. She was building. But the most unexpected change wasn't the car, it was her. Each morning, she rose with purpose, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The bitter coffee, the splinters, the cold metal under her boots, it all felt like a rhythm, a kind of music she hadn't heard in years. One day, while scavenging through her dad's old junk pile behind the barn, Ava stumbled across a dusty milk crate full of cassette tapes and an old, beat-up stereo. She brought it back to the Pullman, cleaned the contacts, rewired the battery leads, and popped in the first tape. Crackling blues poured out harmonica, gravel voice, aching strings. The music filled the hollow space with something like soul. Ava closed her eyes. She remembered Sundays in her childhood garage, her father humming to the radio while fixing brake lines, her mother dancing barefoot by the door, laughing in the glow of a summer sunset. The memory hit her so hard. She sat down on the floor and cried the kind of cry that makes your lungs feel brand new afterward. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw the Pullman differently. It wasn't a shell anymore. It was becoming something sacred. 2 days later, while replacing some rusted brackets near the back wall, she heard a soft voice behind her. "Is that a train?" Ava turned, startled. A boy maybe 10 years old stood just outside the open door, skinny, curious, clutching a half-eaten granola bar. He wore a faded hoodie and a backpack that looked like it belonged to someone twice his size. "It used to be," Ava said, brushing hair from her face. "Now it's kind of something else." The boy squinted, then stepped forward slowly. "My name's Mason." Ava smiled. "Ava, you live nearby." He nodded, pointing towards the trees. "Up that hill. I come down here sometimes. Thought it was abandoned. It was. Now it's mine, I guess." He wandered closer, peering inside at the old benches. The lamp, the tools on the wall. Looks cool, like something from a movie. Ava chuckled. "That's a first." From that day on, Mason came back, always in the late afternoon, sometimes with a juice box in hand, sometimes just with questions. Could he help? Could he hold a wrench? Could he come inside? At first, Ava hesitated. She wasn't used to people, especially not kids. But Mason wasn't like most kids. He didn't talk too much. He didn't ask about her past. He just wanted to help. One evening, he brought his mom. She appeared at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, eyes wary. Her name was Layla. Tall, strong. The kind of woman who had learned to live with her guard up. But when she saw Mason sanding a piece of reclaimed wood beside Ava, her stance softened. "I'm his mother," she said flatly. "He says you're building something here." "I'm trying," Ava replied. Layla scanned the car, the orderliness, the tools hung with care, the small stove Ava had installed with scavenged parts. Her eyes lingered on the photo of Ava's parents taped near the window, held in place by an old wrench. "My boy doesn't talk to many people," she said after a pause. "But he talks about you. That's something." They shared a brief silence. Then Layla added quietly, "If you ever need help, I sew or cook. Not great at fixing things, but I know how to show up." Ava nodded. "Sometimes, showing up is the hardest part." That night, Ava sat on the step of the Pullman car with Mason beside her and Layla brewing tea inside on a portable burner. The lantern flickered against the newly cleaned window panes, and blues music played low in the background. The train car didn't feel like a project anymore. It felt like a place that mattered. Autumn rolled in like a soft exhale. The air turned crisp. The trees whispered in rust-colored leaves, and the Pullman car glowed like something alive beneath the thinning canopy. Ava woke earlier now. Her mornings were filled with the scent of pine, firewood, and black coffee steeped in a dented kettle over her barrel stove. The interior of the car had changed completely. At one end, she'd built a proper sleeping area, a cot with a wool blanket, a shelf of books, and a photo of her parents framed in oak. On the other, a workbench crafted from salvaged barnwood sat beneath the biggest window. She'd patched the glass using fragments donated by a local farmer. Above the bench, Elijah's tools were mounted with care, every wrench, chisel, and measuring tape glimmering in the morning light like sacred artifacts. The Pullman wasn't finished, not even close, but it had stopped feeling like a project. It was home. One afternoon, while Ava was fitting a makeshift curtain rod using 2 bent copper pipes and pure stubbornness, Mason burst through the clearing with a grin spread across his wind-chapped face. "There's a lady from the school," he panted. "She heard about this place. Wants to talk to you." Ava blinked. "What school?" "The elementary. Miss Hartley. She's my teacher. I told her about the train. She wants to come see it." Ava rubbed her temple, laughing under her breath. "You're out here giving tours now." Mason shrugged proudly. "Kinda." 2 days later, a minivan bounced its way down the gravel path and pulled into the clearing. A woman stepped out mid-40s, curly hair pulled into a bun, clipboard in hand. She looked around with visible awe. "This is incredible," she breathed. He wasn't exaggerating. Ava stepped out of the car, wiping paint off her hands onto her jeans. "It's a work in progress." Miss Hartley nodded, walking slowly toward the Pullman. "I'm working on a history project with my class. Local heritage, forgotten spaces, stories that matter. Would you consider letting the kids visit? Ava froze. Kids, a whole class of them. I'm not really a teacher, she said, hesitant. I'm not even sure what this place is yet. Miss Hartley smiled gently. It's something, and sometimes kids need to see that something real can come from nothing. The following week, Ava found herself standing at the edge of her clearing, watching a yellow school bus crawl its way up the ridge road. Her heart pounded like a loose bolt in an engine block. When the doors opened, 24 children spilled out like marbles from a tin, wide eyes, whispers, pointing fingers. Mason stood among them, grinning ear to ear like he'd just invited the president. Ava guided them through the Pullman. She showed them the sleeping corner, the repurposed wood stove, the bookshelf with its random mix of novels, manuals, and Elijah's journal, though she didn't let anyone touch that one. She told them about how the car had been abandoned for decades, left to rot on a forgotten track. She told them how she'd bought it for $500, moved it by sheer willpower and dumb luck, and started fixing it one bolt at a time. And for the first time in her life, she watched as kids listened to her. Really listened. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Why did you fix it?" Ava paused. She could have said because I needed a place to live, or because I had nothing else. But the truth was simpler. Because I needed to believe something broken could be made beautiful again. Silence followed. A few kids scribbled in their notebooks. One boy clapped softly. That night, as the wind rustled through the trees, and the last echo of children's laughter faded from memory, Ava stood on the steps of the Pullman, looking out into the clearing. She wasn't just fixing a train car anymore. She was building a place where people could come, breathe, and remember what it felt like to start again. She lit a candle by the window, poured herself a mug of cider, and wrote in her notebook. It was never about the walls. It was about the door. The days grew shorter, nights colder. By early November, frost crept across the windows like delicate veins, and Ava's fingers stayed numb long after the fire had burned out. She had made progress, real progress. The Pullman was weather-tight, insulated with salvaged denim and wool scraps donated by a neighbor. Layla had stitched together thick curtains from old horse blankets. Mason had painted a crooked wooden sign that read, "Hope Car 47, and nailed it proudly by the door. But Ava was tired. Not from the work she could handle that. It was the silence, the way the night seemed to press in on her, the weight of memory, the aching stillness after everyone had gone home. One evening, while clearing out a rotted storage drawer beneath the old conductor's bench, Ava found a water-damaged envelope sealed, but brittle. She opened it gently, hands shaking. Inside was a letter, yellowed and trembling with time, written in elegant cursive. "To the next soul who finds this place." The letter was from Elijah's wife, Nora. "We built this train car together during the hardest chapter of our lives. After the war took his brother, after cancer took our son, we came here to grieve and to begin again. If you're here now, you must be someone searching too. Don't give up. This place held us through the worst. Let it hold you." 2. Ava's breath caught. Her hands clutched the page to her chest like it might slip away. She hadn't cried in weeks. She thought maybe she was done crying. But the tears came. Not the kind that fall with sobs, but the slow, heavy ones. The kind that come when the weight of everything you've carried for too long finally breaks loose. That night, the wind howled like a voice through the trees. Ava sat alone in the Pullman with the candlelight dancing on the walls. Nora's letter beside her, and a growing doubt curling in her gut. Why had she come here? Really? Was this just some distraction? a desperate attempt to escape grief. Her mother had died 2 winters ago, after a long fight with early-onset dementia. Her final words were barely more than whispers. But Ava remembered one thing clearly. "You always fix things, honey. But don't forget to fix you, too." Ava hadn't known what that meant. Until now. She stood and looked around the car. The walls were cleaner. Yes, the tools were organized. There was a shelf of books. But was she fixing herself? The next day, everything went wrong. A cold snap hit the valley. Her stovepipe cracked. The solar battery shorted. A leak reappeared in the roof she'd just sealed. And to top it all off, someone had stolen 2 of her best tools, likely a drifter who'd come through the trail undetected. She sat outside on the steps, numb, shoulders slumped, staring at the frost-bitten herbs she had planted in old paint cans. They were dead, just like her hope. "I can't do this," she whispered. That's when Mason arrived unannounced as usual, but not alone. Behind him came Layla, 2 neighbors from town, and an older man Ava vaguely recognized from the co-op. They didn't say much, just looked around, assessed the damage, and then started helping. One patched the roof with tar and scrap sheet metal. Layla brought soup and dry blankets. Mason sorted the tools while humming quietly to himself. Ava stood frozen, the lump in her throat too big to speak around. Finally, she asked, "Why are you here?" Layla met her gaze. "Because you showed us how to keep going. Now it's our turn." That night, the fire roared warm inside the Pullman. The roof held, the kettle boiled, and for the first time since her parents passed, Ava laughed. Not politely, not nervously. A deep, real laugh. Later, she sat by the stove with Mason beside her and opened Elijah's notebook. On the inside cover, she wrote a new line. "Restored, not just with tools but with people." Winter came slowly that year, like a guest who wasn't sure if they were welcome. The first snow fell gently, dusting the ridge in white, softening the scars on the land. The Pullman car stood quiet and proud under its blanket of frost, the deep green of its freshly painted steel gleaming like an emerald in the woods. Inside, the air was warm. The stove crackled. Candles glowed in reused glass jars. The once rotting floor now held woven rugs and handmade shelves full of stories. Ava stood at the small window, holding a mug of cider between her hands, watching the trees sway beneath the weight of snow. Her hair was pulled back, streaked with sawdust and firelight. Her fingers were calloused, her eyes softer. She had come to this place alone, heavy with grief, brittle with silence, and now she was surrounded by something she hadn't dared hope for. Community? It had started with small visits. Miss Hartley brought another class. A woman from town dropped off canned goods with a note that read, "For the keeper of the rails, a retired carpenter donated a box of hand tools, just in case she needed the old ways." Even the mayor's wife stopped by, asking, shyly, if she could donate a few antique lanterns. But the most unexpected arrival came one gray afternoon, when Ava found a letter in her makeshift mailbox, written in a hand she hadn't seen since before the world fell apart. It was from her sister. "I heard from someone in town what you're building. I saw the photos. Ava, I didn't know you were still fighting. I thought I lost you after Mom. I'm sorry I stayed away. Can I come see it?" Ava's hands trembled as she held the envelope. Her eyes burned. She hadn't realized how deeply she had buried the hope that someone from her past would reach out. That maybe her own story still mattered to someone beyond the clearing. 3 days later, her sister Rachel arrived. She pulled up in a small hybrid car, nervous smile on her face, eyes wide as she stepped out. Ava met her by the steps of the Pullman. They stood for a moment, not hugging yet, not speaking, just breathing. "You really built this?" Rachel finally asked, voice cracking with disbelief. "I didn't build it alone," Ava replied. She welcomed her inside. Rachel walked slowly through the space, running her fingers along the smoothed edges of reclaimed wood, pausing to look at the shelf of tools, the strings of hand-sewn flags hanging from the rafters. Her gaze landed on the picture of their parents, now framed and illuminated by a soft overhead bulb. "She would have loved this," she whispered. "I think she does," Ava said quietly. That night, the Pullman filled with people more than ever before. Layla brought roasted vegetables and cornbread. Miss Hartley came with 3 students and their parents. A local musician, who'd heard of the story through town gossip, brought a guitar and played blues under the stars. Ava lit every candle she had. The children chased each other around the clearing, their laughter echoing through the trees. Mason wore a conductor's hat someone had gifted him and gave tours of the Pullman to anyone who'd listen. Rachel sat by the fire, tears in her eyes, hands wrapped around the same enamel mug their mother once used. Ava stood at the doorway of the Pullman, watching it all unfold, the community, the laughter, the music, the life. The train car had once been a shell, a coffin of memories and rust. Now it pulsed with meaning. Near the end of the night, as the fire dwindled and the last song drifted into smoke, Rachel joined Ava on the platform steps. "You built more than a home here," she said. "I built a way back," Ava replied. And she had a way back to family, to connection, to herself. She had turned rust into refuge, silence into song, and brokenness into something that made people believe again. The Pullman car never moved again. It didn't need to, because it had become a destination. In the end, Ava Morgan didn't just restore a forgotten train car, she restored herself. She showed us that healing doesn't always arrive with fanfare sometimes. It comes through blisters, silence, and the sound of a single hammer strike in an empty forest. She reminded us that broken things are not worthless, that beauty can be coaxed from rust, that sometimes the most meaningful journeys don't take you anywhere, they bring you home. The Pullman car didn't become a museum. It didn't become a luxury retreat. It became something infinitely rarer, a sanctuary for second chances. For those who had lost, those who had grieved, those who had forgotten how to hope, Ava built a place that whispered, "You're not alone. You're not too far gone. You still matter." That's the lesson the Pullman left behind. You don't need to start with much. You just need to start.